In this video, I'm going to spotlight blue borage, which is a fantastic annual that acts much like a perennial, and show you a couple of different applications for when I sift my compost and when I don't. 90% of all the compost that comes out of the chicken yard does not get sifted. However, today I am going to be doing a bit of sifting, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how I do that and why I do that. This is not only a compost, but it acts in many ways like a mulch. It's got a lot of wood chips in it. There's a lot of biochar that's been incorporated into this. And as this has been breaking down, it's made itself to be a very, very nice home for a lot of worms and all of their activity. I will say that it's not the most efficient method of doing this, but since I don't actually do that much of it, this seems to work just fine. I'll give you a little bit closer look as to what it is. A frame of 2x4 that has these ears that overhang. I'm using 1/2-inch hardware cloth that's sandwiched in between the 2x4 frame and held on with this batting. The only time I actually sift this material at all is when this is being used for my raised garden beds. And that's what I'm going to be doing today, is planting some annuals in my raised garden beds. I typically like to keep those with fairly refined compost going in as top dress, because I don't exactly know from year to year which bed I'm going to be growing my root vegetables in. And I don't want to be introducing a bunch of this heavier material, which is going to directly impact the growth of things like carrots that I might want to be a little longer, a little straighter. This actually sifts a little bit better if it's a little bit dry, but I just watered this and it's been kept covered, so it's a little clumpier and it takes a little bit more to get it through the screen. But essentially what I'll be left with is all of this heavier material, which can either be put right back directly into the chicken yard, or I can use this elsewhere. Oftentimes I will use this sifted out material as mulch around some of the trees and other elements that I'm trying to get established around the property. So essentially this is what we have that's being sifted out. I'll pick through, and if there's any larger rocks, I'll grab those out. And then I take this and put it off to the side in a collection bin. This is essentially what we'll have as the residue. Here's a closer up view of the sifted compost. You can see that there's a lot of nice soil aggregation in this. There's biochar, some of the smaller pieces of wood chip have gotten through, and this is just a result of that 8-month process of allowing this material to decompose in this yard. But I am going to let these chickens out and give them a little bit of a opportunity to check that pile out before I cover it up. These are my 2022 birds. They know exactly where to go. I will give them a moment to enjoy this before I cover it up from them. Prior to use, I like to isolate the pile from the chicken's activity, and I'll cover it with a tarp about a month out. About every 3 days or so, I'll uncover the pile to give it a little bit of water, but also to allow it to breathe. This mix gets used to top dress my raised beds once in the spring and once in the fall. What do I do with the other 90% that is not being sifted? It goes out as a top or side dress amendment, supporting mostly perennial plants that I'm trying to get established here on the property. And after I put out a pretty healthy layer of it, I'll come over the top with wood chips just to provide that armor, that cover that's going to help to keep that moisture in, reduce erosion. This little pomegranate was planted last fall out of a 1-gallon pot. It's starting to show a little bit of new growth this spring, but it's got a number of different supporting cast around it, some of which I've actually planted, others which naturally have just decided this is where they want to be. This is some wild geranium that's already flowered, and I like to try to encourage that because it's a great draw for pollinators. This is umbrella sedge. Got some comfrey that I've planted. Here's some ribwort plantain. There's some California poppy. There's some morning glory. And I like to try to encourage these to go to seed where they're at. I took one of the flowering heads last year and cast a bunch of seed into this area, and this is one that just decided it wanted to be here. Collinsia, more wild geranium, more California poppy, more comfrey. There's some dock in here. There's some crane melon. This is blue borage. It's actually in the same family as comfrey. This is an edible, and you can eat not only the leaves, but you can eat the flowers. I like the taste of the flowers. I don't particularly care for the leaves. They're quite prickly, and you have to prepare them a certain way in order to make that palatable. But it is an edible plant. It's something that has been able to reseed itself here once I get it started. Another positive with this plant is that we don't get a lot of hard freezes here in Zone 9A. And so this particular plant was started last spring. It went all the way through the winter, and it's just now starting to die back, and we are in the middle of May. New borage plants coming in. All of these are borage plants that are starting to break ground. There's some over on this side. Here's one that's a little bit more established, but none of these are anything that I've planted. They all originated from a plant that I just removed that had been here for more than a year. There's a tremendous amount of new borage plants starting to find their way in and amongst all of this comfrey. Very prolific and an extremely great pollinator, particularly for climates where it doesn't get hard freezes. Consider subscribing to the channel for future updates on what we're doing developing this edible landscape. Thanks for watching.